And record. Hello and welcome to today's GLOBETalk, Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress, collaborating on topics of global importance. My name is Tanya Sadowski. I am the program coordinator at the Global Engagement Department here at the Community Solution Education System, and I'm very, very excited about today's talk and today's collaboration on this topic. Before we get into the actual GLOBETalk, a little bit about GLOBETalks. This session is brought to you by the Community Solution Global Engagement Department. The Community Solution Education System and our schools are committed to preparing innovative, engaged, purposeful agents of change who serve our global community. Our global engagement team works to bring this mission to life by providing leadership, infrastructure, and support for internationalization throughout the Community Solution community. We are very passionate about creating learning opportunities that have a positive impact on our global community. Our GLOBETalk series is part of our global engagement mission and provides virtual year-round discussions to introduce our community to thought leaders in higher education, experts on key functional areas, best practices, and the diversity of ideas necessary to expand our own internal strategic thinking. Before we begin today's GLOBETalk, we'd like to go over a few tips for best accessing this session. We ask that you please mute yourself during today's session, but feel free to use the chat box and reactions throughout. We also recommend keeping your video off in the interest of conserving bandwidth. As the speaker is presenting, we will be monitoring the chat box. We do have a lot of time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to pose your questions or comments throughout. We also request your patience. Technology can be a challenge, as you all know, and we will do our best. And as I mentioned earlier, should there be any issues, all GLOBETalks are recorded and available after the session. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Emma Grace from the Chicago School, who will introduce our featured speaker today. Dr. Grace, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important event. I would like to introduce our guest, Professor and Dr. Miranda Olff from the University of Amsterdam Medical Center, Department of Psychiatry, and ARC National Psychotrauma Center in Diemen, the Netherlands. Professor Olff is also the chair of the Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress and editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Psychotraumatology. And we would like to start with disclosure, and we would like to inform you that this event is sponsored through the Chicago School's J1 Scholarship Grant, and Professor Dr. Miranda Olff is the J1 International Visiting Scholar and hosted by me. And this event is supported by the Community Solution Education System and the Chicago School's Global Engagement Office. I would like to now introduce more in detail Professor and Dr. Miranda Olff. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you here today. We've been meeting in the past a few times in Amsterdam and at a couple of conferences, but it's really a great honor and pleasure to have you at the Chicago School DC campus. Professor and Dr. Miranda Olff is a world-renowned expert on trauma and traumatic stress, and she is the one who organized the Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress, gathering international experts on trauma from different countries and continents of the world, and keeping them all working together as a global team. And the Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress is now very well known. It has its own annual conferences and meetings, and it's also part of the, it's also very much engaged with the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, other professional associations and entities. Professor and Dr. Miranda Olff is also the founding editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Psychotraumatology. It's the world's leading journal on high level and probably the top quality research on traumatic stress and everything related to trauma. I will now turn it to Professor and Dr. Miranda Olff to present this talk. You can see here the European Journal of Psychotraumatology that Miranda Olff is the editor-in-chief of, and you can also see just trying to show the associate editors. You can see associate editors here. Those are also world-known experts on trauma and traumatic stress. You may recognize some of those names. Read peer-reviewed literature and scholarly literature on traumatic stress. The European Journal of Psychotraumatology is a gold open access journal, and everything that published by this journal is freely available to anyone, anywhere in the world who can access it online, including our school. It's been now in its 15th year, right? It's just celebrated its 15th year anniversary and has published really important and interesting research on traumatic stress. So I will now turn it to you.
Thank you, Emma. Should we have this?
You can, you can do this one here, maybe.
Well, thank you very much for this extensive introduction. It's such a great pleasure to be here in Washington and to work with the school. I'm really impressed by everything that's going on here and the international atmosphere. It's really amazing, and I wish I could have been a student here when I was younger. I'm really happy to share with you a bit about our work with the Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress. You can easily find the website online. We have the link up there. But I will also guide you through it to get a bit of an idea of what it is we are doing. So actually, this is sort of a seminal paper that made us realize, why do we need global collaboration on traumatic stress? Well, first of all, trauma is a global thing, and it is highly prevalent. It's actually the norm in most countries. And what this paper by Ron Kessler also shows is that it has very long-term consequences. And in particular, interpersonal trauma carries a high risk for PTSD and also other mental disorders. So this is just one of the papers, and there are many of them, of course, that emphasize the need to work globally on this important topic of traumatic stress. So our rationale to start this is that trauma is a norm around the world, and also that a great majority of the global burden actually takes place in low and middle income countries. While most of us still do our work, maybe not here in the school, because I know you're very international, but a lot of the published research still comes from weird countries, Western, industrialized, etc. And we need really more research, and there's so much more work to do in these global South in particular. We also know that traumatic experiences, trauma-related symptoms, but also their treatments may differ across cultures. So symptoms may manifest differently, or treatments may need specific cultural components in there, and we still know very little about that. Trauma does not stop at borders. Big disasters like COVID or natural disasters or armed conflict, unfortunately, it's not a national thing. What we very strong feel about is that we should work in team science. So what we do in teams. It's about collaboration. It's in the name. We have multilingual groups. We have multicultural experts on board, and we try to be very inclusive. So for all demographic aspects, all gender aspects, all cultural aspects. And open science is one of our buzzwords, and I will get back to that a little bit, but we are very strong about making everything freely available, to make tools accessible, to make data accessible, and all the information we produce. If you want to join, you can just go to this link. It's all free. We're not making any profit or any money out of it. And so how can we exist? Well, we have costs for the website, that's about it. And everybody else does their work in the website in their volunteer time. And we have supporting societies. So Emma already mentioned the ISTSS, the International Society. That's one of the societies that is supporting this network. So they pay an annual fee, but so it's really carried by all the societies in the world on traumatic stress, because we all believe that together we can be stronger and we can do nicer things. So what are the topics we should address? That's, of course, a very important question. So when this all started, we were sitting together and we were trying to figure out what do we think is a good topic to work on globally with people from all these different teams and countries. And the first agreed topic was to start working on resilience and recovery in adult survivors of childhood maltreatment. So child maltreatment has become a very important topic. And the first thing we did was to develop e-pamphlets. So these are short information brochures on the impact of childhood abuse and neglect. And these are now available in 9 languages, and we share them on the website. And this is what they look like. You can see several languages there listed in the middle. So it's all very easy to find and download. So the website looks like this, and we have now organized it by types of trauma. So child trauma was the first that we started with, but then you can see several other topics and types of traumas have been added in the meantime. And I will give you a few examples of the projects we do together on some of these topics. So there's types of trauma, there's assessment, interventions, and methods and mechanisms, and I will speak a bit about that. So here it shows child trauma. We have adult interpersonal violence. We have forcibly displaced, so about refugees. We have a section on armed conflict. What can we do during armed conflict, for instance? Obviously, when the pandemic broke out, we have developed a high number of projects on COVID-19. We have also climate change. We know that many students are concerned about the impact on the world of the changing climate, eco-anxiety, etc. How can we assess that? What can we do together to not feel so powerless? So there's a bit of projects on that. There's trauma and aging. We know that trauma affects the brain and actually is a risk factor for cognitive decline and for developing dementia. So we have a lot of activity also on that topic. Bereavement and grief as a specific type of a problem following loss. And we have moral injury, which is a more recent concept related to experiencing morally injurious events. So let me give you an example of one of the child projects we did. And I personally think this is a really very interesting project. You can see the paper has now been published, and you see the number of authors involved from all kinds of different nationalities. And this was actually an online task that was given to many people around the world, where we wanted to assess interpersonal distance, the distance that to friends or to strangers that people still feel comfortable with. And we know that if people experience childhood maltreatment, they have a lot of bad learning experiences about interpersonal contact, and also generally very heightened threat sensitivity. So they may respond very negatively to a range of social stimuli. But there has been very little research, and especially outside of Western countries, on the comfortable interpersonal distance when you have experienced childhood abuse. So we develop this online task with the aim to assess the distance. It's a reaction time task where you have to sort of, the person is approaching you and then you indicate when it's enough, close enough. And what we found actually in a set of almost 3,000 adults from diverse cultures, that higher maltreatment leads to higher distances to both friends and strangers. And there were many more findings, but this was the main finding, and feel free to read the paper. So this is something we could do online, and therefore it was easy to do it around the world with many involved. So the type of research we can do together globally is also different sometimes. This is another project that I thought was also interesting to mention, because it's about college students or university students. And it's about sexual violence. And we know that this is happening a lot among students. It's actually a public health problem. And it has a range of mental health outcomes, not just PTSD, but also anxiety and depression and substance use or suicidal thoughts, a wide range of problems. But actually, we should get a better understanding of the extent of these problems and also the barriers for seeking help. So we know that it's very difficult to do this cross-culturally because there are so many inconsistent definitions of what is considered sexual violence. What's maybe sexual violence in one country may be normal in another country. So these are things we have been thinking through quite a bit, and also the measurement of sexual violence. And what also has been done so far is that it has focused really on a binary approach of gender. Well, we obviously know there are many more gender identities. So what we aim to do with this study, this is still ongoing. So please, if you're interested, check it out. You may want to join. So we want to assess the rates of sexual violence on campuses around the world. We want to assess the impact, mental health impacts, using these same measures or culturally adapted. And we want to know if there are any differences by self-identified gender and sexual orientation. And obviously, very importantly, what would be the barriers for help seeking? How can we take those barriers away, or reporting to the appropriate authorities? So for this study, we use an online survey, ideally with representative samples of university students. And on several occasions, we have added on interviews to get a more in-depth understanding of the issues. So now, for instance, another example for armed conflict is what we're doing now is we are developing a position paper together on mental health and psychosocial support during ongoing armed conflict. And unfortunately, at this moment in the world, there is an extensive amount of armed conflict. And we know so little about what we can do. There are no studies on interventions in the acute phase. There are many studies afterwards or in the sort of immediate aftermath of a conflict, but what type of interventions might work best during the conflict while they are so needed there's known very little about that. So we're working on a position paper. Then we got to the assessment chapter. As you can see, we have many measures on board that we work on, or many topics that we try to find the best measures for. And so I will show, we'll go to sex and gender, and then also show the GPS and cars culturally shortly. But we also have what you can see on the bottom there, the moral injury and bereavement, especially sections have also a lot on measures. But let's look at sex and gender orientation. I have personally been very interested in studying sex and gender differences in PTSD. We know PTSD, but also other trauma-related outcomes, depression, anxiety, etc., are much more prevalent, 2 to 3 times more prevalent among women compared to men. And why is that? So there are many different explanations for that. Some have to do with the type of trauma, some have to do with the age of experiencing the traumatic event. Well, I've written quite a bit on the combination of factors that may explain these differences. In the sex and gender literature, it became very clear that many authors do not really know the difference between sex and gender. So we have been trying what sex were you assigned at birth for sex, and what is your gender identity, and then we have all these options. The graph below makes the difference very clear, I think. So sex is about biological, rooted in genetics, anatomy, physiology. Gender is much more a psychosocial construct, behavioral, social, cultural aspects that are associated with a certain gender identity. And these are not fixed, the gender, they may also switch over time. But what we would really like to do, and maybe we can invite you to help us with that, is to also have these questions in a standard way in all kinds of different languages. So we can later better compare our studies and pool the data if needed, if we have the same questions and the same answer categories. So that's for sex and gender, and a lot more is going on. And then I would like to share something about a project I've also been very involved in, which is developing a screening instrument, the Global Psychotrauma Screen, or GPS. So this actually started very early on, as soon as we had decided that we wanted to focus as the first topic on childhood maltreatment. We were thinking, what are these long-term consequences of childhood maltreatment? It's not just PTSD. People develop a whole range of complaints or other complaints, or some of these complaints, but it's not always typically PTSD has been the focus of research most of the time. So this started from the original question of what are long-term consequences of childhood maltreatment, but now we have also broadened it to other types of trauma. So it's basically that we consider the outcomes of trauma in a transdiagnostic way. So we can have symptoms of depression, of PTSD, of complex PTSD, where there are also disturbances in self-organization. There are symptoms about anxiety, depression, sleep problems, self-injurious behavior, dissociation, other physical, emotional, social problems, or substance abuse. In total, there are 17 items in a very quick yes/no answer format. So the whole skill can be filled out in 5 minutes. And we also assess 5 risk or protective factors that we know that in the literature have been shown to be predicting negative mental health outcomes. And these are other stressful events, childhood trauma, a history of mental illness, the lack of social support, and the lack of psychosocial resilience. So these are all assessed, also a functioning item. And on the right side of the slide, you can see what it looks like in the web app. So we have PDFs for about 36 languages. They can all be downloaded from the website. And we have a web version that you can fill out online. You can do it right away. And then there will be also some feedback on the scoring. And it starts with a very brief description of what it is that you have experienced. Here you can see the questions in Dutch, which is my native language, as you may hear. So it starts with a question about what is the event you experienced, when did this happen, because it makes a difference if it was very acutely or if it was a long time ago. If it's very acutely, it's very normal to have a wide range of acute responses to a very abnormal situations. So it depends on how we interpret responses on the timing of the event. And then we also have these categories of events that make sure that we know we're speaking about a traumatic event or a potentially other stressful event. We have also child and teenager versions of the global psychotrauma screen. And Dr. Grace is the person who is in charge of this. And probably also some of the students that are now online have been working on developing these questionnaires, also in many different languages. What we did is we adapted the language slightly. And for the teenagers, we left out, for instance, the questions asking about the event. And for children, it's even shorter questionnaire. So we have adapted it. There have been a lot of studies also done to make sure that we use the right words and the right language. Dr. Grace has been very active in this area. And we have user guides, but also for the adult, but also for the child and the teenage version that can also be downloaded easily. I'd like to give you an example of a project we did using the GPS, the Global Psychotrauma screen, the adult version in this case. So this was just after the COVID-19 pandemic emerged, and we wanted to examine the transdiagnostic traumatic stress responses to COVID-19 compared to other potentially traumatic events around the world. So basically, we wanted to know, is COVID-19 a traumatic stressful event, potentially? So we collected data with the GPS in over 7,000 participants from 88 countries from April to November 2020. And you can see that we grouped them into the continents or specific areas in the world based on UN regions. To get numbers that we were able to compare. So we could not compare every country, but we could compare these regions. The majority, 3/4, was female and 1/4 male. Yes. And what were the types of events reported? Well, related to COVID-19, we used actually a study. We did text mining on the open text field. And that came up with a certain number of topics and some with very significant differences in output in mental health outcome relationships. But for instance, a COVID-19 related event was that people reported people dying of COVID-19, having to deal with negative consequences on jobs, COVID-19 affecting the health of family members or experiencing personal stress. And other events, for instance, involved sexual abuse and assaults, suicide or illness of a spouse or relative, car accidents or war experiences. So all these events are very serious events, and if you look at these other events in particular, you would say these are very typical traumatic stress events, potentially traumatic stress events. So we were very curious to see whether there was a difference in the relationship with mental health outcomes. So these were the results. These are basically all the continents listed. And then in orange, we have the total of the symptoms related to COVID-19 related events. And in blue, we have the number of symptoms related to other stressful events. And a quick look at this picture already shows that COVID-19 related events overall led to a higher number of mental health outcomes than the other stressful events. We can also see that there were quite some differences between the continents in the overall amount of events, but also in how the responses to COVID versus other events were distributed. So there was a significant difference in North America and also in Latin America, where in North America, there was a significantly higher score to the other traumatic events compared to COVID-19, while in Latin America, people actually reported much higher mental health complaints related to COVID-19 events. How can we explain this? We think that this may have to do with the political unrest in the US at this moment, where we had actually here in Washington the violence at the Capitol. It was just this period around the elections also. Well, and on the other hand, so that may have led to other events being more prominently there. And in Latin America, there was a very high burden of COVID-19, especially in Brazil, that had a large number of participants. We had a large number of participants from Brazil. So we think that may be the explanation. So in total, we found that COVID-19 led to more mental health symptoms, that all the risk factors that we assessed were associated with higher symptom levels, both related to COVID-19 and also the other events. And we also found that countries that were affected by COVID-19 more heavily had higher mental health impact, both of COVID-19, but also the other events. So it generally increases possibility of negative mental health outcomes after a traumatic event. And the regional differences I already mentioned above, why we thought that might happen. So this is just, it's a very simple online survey distributed around the world by many volunteers involved in this project. It resulted in a really nice data set that is now free to use. It now has over 10,000 participants even. And there are so many more questions we can actually answer from that data set. All right. So another instrument that you might find interesting on the website is called CARDS, the Childhood Attachment and Relational Trauma Screen. And this is a really novel form of survey methodology online. And what it does is asking about what did your family look like when you were a child? So did you have a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, an uncle, or aunt, or stepfather, or And they then are all listed on the screen. Are they as you can see there, as example, and then there are questions about these families and how they behaved. So this practice item here asks, this person is male, and then you have to click Uncle C, father, brother, Uncle G, and stepfather. But then the next question may be, this person cared about me a lot, or this person hit me when I did not behave well. And then it moves on towards abusive behaviors. And it gives a very complete picture of the situation. So the latest study that was published on this CARDS measure included over 3,000 participants, again, a majority female. But what was really interesting was to see these gender differences in outcomes. So here we found that females reported to have more emotionally abusive mothers, while males reported having more physically abusive fathers. And we were really intrigued by those findings. And all scores on the cards were related to increased trans-diagnostic mental health outcomes on the GPS also. So these abusive relationships were clearly reflected in negative mental health outcomes. So it's again another kind of online experiment we could easily do with many participants. We're then moving to interventions, obviously also a very important part. And it's our interventions for trauma and PTSD mainly have mostly, again, been developed in Western countries. Many have been developed in the US, some in Europe. And we still need to do so much work on how can we culturally adapt these interventions so that they are also effective, feasible and effective in other kinds of situations. Can we do these interventions in low and middle income countries? Can we do these interventions in situations where it's really not safe to be on the street, for instance, where there's a lot of gang violence or other type of conflict? What are specific forms of interventions? Can we translate them to, for instance, this fourth project to a Latin American country? Well, there are many, many interesting questions to answer, and these are all now ongoing. Check them out if you are interested. So that's about methods and mechanisms. We would like to share with you a few methods and mechanisms that we feel are important for working globally on the topic of traumatic stress. And one of them is the use of AI in doing a systematic review. We all have to do in our scientific career a systematic review. And a systematic review means that we're searching for certain papers that fulfill our inclusion criteria. And then we find 10,000 papers. And then we have to screen all these papers to see if they really fit our inclusion criteria. And here's where AI comes in. So it's actually a very ASR review. It's developed in Utrecht in the Netherlands by Professor Rens van der Schoot. And Bruno Coimbra is now leading this project in the Netherlands. He was also with me in Amsterdam. They are very supportive to other people wanting to do this. It's all free to use, and there's a lot of information on how to do it. But what it basically does is when you find these 10,000 records, you use machine learning to rank the records in how likely are they that they meet the inclusion criteria. So you have to help the computer learn how to discriminate between these papers, but you may only have to do 100 instead of 10,000. So this is a really interesting thing if you want to do a systematic review. I already mentioned open science. So FAIR data is one of the principles of open science. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we wanted to know, are traumatic stress data FAIR? Well, they're not yet, but we're working towards that. So if you're doing research, it is so important that you share your data. And why is it important? How can we find them? How are they accessible? How can other people also work with them and reuse them? Because if you do that, like I said, this big data set on the global psychotrauma screen already now has, I don't know, maybe 6 publications or so, not only by me, but by other people who saw the data set and, oh, I want to do text mining on the open text field to see how the topics are described, or I want to look into whatever other aspects that is in there. So if you share your data with the world, there's much higher knowledge, discovery, and innovation. There are more publications, and it will also generate new data. It doesn't mean that you always have to share to make your data completely open. FAIR does not mean open necessarily, because sometimes there are aspects of the data that we don't want to share because there may still be, identity issues or other aspects that we want to not make completely open. So it doesn't mean it's open. It's just that you know where the data are, who to approach, and how to use or what to use. And to help people who want to use data sets on traumatic stress, we have here on this page collected all data sets we know of that are freely available, openly available, or accessible, and want to share their data. And it's a big table. You can scroll through it. So the GPS data are also in here. And it's a very beautiful initiative, for instance, for students who need to do a thesis or need to add some data to their qualitative interviews. They want to look at quantitative data sets, or well, there are many ways they can be used. So feel free to check it out. And then finally, a very important section is the student section. So I think that it's very important to involve students also in the work that we do. We are really committed to find students from around the world who want to join the student section. This is now run by Dan Jenkins in South Africa, but he's very happy to have more students on board, and also especially to have projects run by students. And he has now a group of people together. They meet regularly online and have really very interesting discussions. And I'm always very impressed what ideas students come up with and what suggestions they can make for new projects, papers to write. And then sometimes we help a little bit. We can, I'm editor of a journal, so I can easily say, this would be something for a letter to publish, or this is maybe good to do a nice new review or whatever. So you're welcome to join. It's all free. You can scan the QR code there, and we hope that many of you and many students around the world, and also please bring students from low and middle income countries to join the global collaboration on traumatic stress. And I think that ends my presentation. Thank you very much. We have all the references here in the presentation as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Olff. And we will now take any questions that you may have or any comments here. So I'm happy to see Lakita Long here. She used to be in my class back in summer 1. And I'm sure there are many students, other students here. I know Narda Karias was here. Narda translated this GPS teenage or child version. I think it was GPS teenage version into Spanish. So, and she is also doing her research in El Salvador using the GPS scale. So I'm sure there are some other students here who are also, I saw one more student who may be interested, who is actually from the Netherlands. Yes, Rania is also here. So feel free to ask any questions you may have. Okay, I see something in here. Thank you, Narda. Any questions or comments?
Any suggestions for new projects we should do?
Yeah. I wanted just to emphasize again everything that the Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress does is free, and our goal is to make science available and accessible and free for anyone around the world who is concerned about the topics of trauma and topics of global importance. So all the free data sets that are made available by the Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress. If you need something for your dissertation, something that can supplement your original empirical data, just check on the website and see if you can find something that, because 10,000 participants worldwide collected data, there must be a country of your interest among those 88 countries, and there must be some interesting and important data for you out of those 10,000 plus. So take some time to check those out and see if you can find them. And I found it really interesting that you talked about the AI supported literature review. So we have so many articles published. Some topics are not well studied, but others are studied extensively. And many topics on trauma are actually studied extensively, and there is a lot of literature to review. And since you have this initiative here on how to actually use the AI for literature review, that is also very helpful and time saving. So thank you for sharing that. This was really great. So here is a question from Rania. How can we get engaged in the projects that your network is leading?
That's a very good question. Well, the first thing is to find out if there is a topic that you are very interested in yourself. So for instance, if you go to the website and you think, well, child trauma and interpersonal distance is something I'm really interested in. And then you can see that these projects that are listed have a project leader. And you can email the project leader. It often says, if you want to join, email this or that person. We also have a registration we have a registration page where you can list up, and then you get a newsletter 4 times a year, and there are often calls for a new project or ongoing project where we need people to join us, or that are in a certain phase that for instance, we need a translation in one language of a certain module or something. So we often have specific calls, but it's also totally possible to start a new project. And then you can also use the register page and fill out your ideas for a new project. And we will help you get that running. So if we think this is, an interesting project and we see whether it fits in a certain theme, we can help you to get that going. And we have this large network there, many people have registered and they have indicated what they are interested in. So some people register and they say, I would really like to do a spiritual intervention-based study. And so if we have more people who want that, we can connect these people and then together they can do this type of project. Or someone says, I want someone from South Korea because I want to compare how our measure works here compared to South Korea. And then we find members in South Korea who might be willing to do that. So it's a bit of a
networking.
Yeah, it's networking.
It's networking. Yeah, it's a great opportunity for networking internationally, connecting with people who study trauma in many other parts of the world and doing something together with them. And so far, everyone who works in with the global collaboration on traumatic stress, we all do it as volunteers. We volunteer our time and our expertise and our experience to just help people connect and use. We always put out everything we do for other people to use. So sharing and doing this team science is something that we are passionate about.
So there's another question. Are there organizations you are connected with that want to work with students and aid in connecting in their country to complete research? Are there any organizations? Well, we don't have organizations on board other than the stress societies, but these societies have representatives that are members and that have projects running and often would like to have other people on board.
So the networking through the global collaboration on traumatic stress happens at the individual level. You connect with someone who is also doing something or is in the country that you may be interested in, and you start collaborating with that person in another country. And that person, of course, works for some organization or university or is a member of local professional society on traumatic stress or maybe other society, psychological society. And that's how you find if that person works for that organization, then if you need support from that organization, then you reach out to that organization through that person. So it helps build individual connections with people in other parts of the world. And through them, you can also reach out to organizations that they are connected with.
Yes, we have many exchanges between students who then spend a couple of months in another university because there's another researcher there who does a certain project. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot is possible, really.
Any other questions? Anything else you would like Professor Olff to talk about? Professor Olff actually was, before she came to Washington, D.C., was in Boston presenting how many? 5 projects? Yes, 5 projects in 3 days, right? And the rooms were full always and very much interested and engaging discussions, and public, of course, was there to listen. So that was another place to collaborate internationally. When you go to those conferences, when you attend those conferences, when you attend those networking, like in-person, direct networking opportunities. So here is one more question.
And we organize also conferences. So we had the first conference in South Africa last year. And next year we will have a smaller meeting in India. And then the year after that, we will have again a big conference. And we're working on the exact location for that one. So watch the website if you want to know.
So those are conferences specifically organized by the Global Collaboration on Traumatic Stress. And yes, if we will see where the next one happens.
Yeah. And then all the supporting societies obviously also have their conferences, such as ESDSS in Europe. The next one will be in Georgia. And the Japanese society, the Australian society, they all have their own meetings also.
Okay. So one more question here. Based on what do you choose projects that you support in your network? Based on what? Yeah, based on what do you choose projects that you support in your network?
Yeah. Do we have any project? Well, it should be related to traumatic stress. It should have a global aspect. So ideally across several countries, but it could also be the adaptation or the adaptation of something developed in one country to another country. And it should just appeal to us, you know, it should be interesting, which is is very easy to do. Yeah.
Students often look for validated research measures for their dissertations or for their thesis, and you can check those that are on this website as well, and that we showed on the screen here. For example, global psychotrauma screen, it's already been validated in many different parts of the world in global samples and like national samples. And so it has been translated. It's already been translated. The work is already done. You don't need to do translations. You already have it validated in different parts of the world. And if you want to use it and if you need support, like saying that, yes, this has been validated, this has been already translated, that's also helpful. It helps you to find measures that you would want to use. Other instruments other than the global psychotrauma screen, there are a few other instruments as well that you may be interested in. I mean, it's really helpful to have those resources freely available that have already been vetted and validated or are in the process of validation if you want to use it for your own project, like you are doing for your dissertation or for your thesis. Or another opportunity is join the existing projects or start a new project as long as it's international or global.
Or help us translate these
Yes.
questionnaires in other languages that we don't have yet. We don't have all languages in the world yet.
Actually, the first study, other than the global one, the first study on the global psychotrauma screen validation at the national level or within the country was in the US here, done by the Chicago School students, actually. And some of them have already graduated. Those were our students here in DC campus, and we are right now in DC campus. Those were our students in DC campus who served as research assistants. Many of them have already graduated. Some of them are still working on their own dissertation projects, who actually contributed to that validation study. And the study has been published a couple of years ago. It's been published. And we had another paper published earlier on also with our students who have now graduated, who also contributed to the adaptation of the global psychotrauma screen from adult to the child and teenage version. That was also done by our students. So we have been really actively involved with global collaboration on traumatic stress here in DC campus, but we also wanted other campuses and other programs and students know about it, that there is open and very professional and reliable resource network available out there. So that's what we would like to probably conclude with. Oh, by the way, if you are in DC area, we are going tomorrow, Professor Olff is going to give in-person, hands-on workshop on global psychotrauma screen, how to use global psychotrauma screen, how to do all calculations and interpretation of the scores and everything. It will be a hands-on workshop here in DC campus tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you are around in DC area, feel free to come to DC campus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, so very much, Dr. Olff, for this very, very fascinating topic and conversation. I really appreciate your time. I know you are here very, very shortly for a short trip here to the US. Thank you so much for joining us for today. Really appreciate it. And again, for all of you who've joined us, you will be receiving a link to this video shortly, probably later on this week. But thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.